minutes. Should be going, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, review session number 1. Good thing the weather's nice because we had a lot of people show up. So if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll always post the link on SharePoint so that you can check that out later if it doesn't work out for you. And then for everybody that's here, if you get home and you're like, I wrote this down, I don't really understand it, you can rewatch this. It might help you for the test. So the test on the study sheet, it said it was actually 50 questions, but in reality, there's 40 questions, not 50. I decided to cut 10 off of it. And then you're gonna get 3 essay questions, of which you have to do 2, okay? So it's 40 questions, matching or multiple choice. Then there's one identification section, which I'll explain in a second. For those of you that just got here, I'm actually gonna do 2 review sessions. So if you wanna sit inside and wait, or if you wanna stay there, that's cool too, okay? But it was pretty full, okay? So, but anyways, so like I said, 40 questions, matching, no, it'll be about a half hour, okay? About a half hour. So, 40 questions, a group of identification, and then a group of multiple choice and a group of matching. Then you're gonna get 3 essay questions. If you printed off the sheet that's posted on SharePoint, it gives you a brief overview of what those are about, right? One of them is about applying the goals of psychology to solving a problem. The other one is about applying the concept of the trilogy of the mind to some situation that you discussed, you kind of make up. And then the other one is, can't remember if I used the first one I had down or not. The other one is about research, like determining if some research is a good idea or not, okay? What the identification section is it basically asks you to identify whether or not something is part of those biological or behavioral or cognitive, psychoanalytical, experimental, or sociocultural approaches. So remember those main approaches, like the big idea from chapter 1? You'll get a statement that would say something like, focused on the subconscious. And then you would say that that matches most with what approach? With psychoanalytical. Yep, exactly. So there's a section like that that's like 8 or 9 questions. So you might use like the psychoanalytical thing like 3 times, you might only use it once, right? Okay, so there's a lot of questions. I'm big on like application questions or just kind of general questions, not like specifically identifying stuff. There's some questions like that on there where it just says, for example, what is a hypothesis? So what's a hypothesis? That's actually a question on the test. What's a short way to know what a hypothesis is? An educated guess, exactly. That's the layman's definition of a hypothesis. More specifically in research, what a hypothesis is you take some past experience that you have and you try to determine, okay, in the past, this is what happened in a similar situation. Let's try to redo it and then maybe this will work better, okay? Or maybe something else will happen. So you'll get some questions like that. There's also questions about people, like for example, which person is most associated with the psychoanalytical approach? Freud. Yep, Sigmund Freud. Yep. Which person is most associated with the behavioral approach? There's probably 3 with that guy. But Skinner, Watson, Pavlov, those are the 3 main guys with the behavioral approach. Who's credited with setting up the first psychological lab? Yeah, Wilhelm Wundt. Yep, Wilhelm Wundt. Okay, if you go in to study psychology and you get a job as a psychologist, right? That's what you're doing for a living. You get a job as a psychologist. Are you gonna be researching like some really weird stuff, or are you gonna be more likely to like research stuff in a school? Are you gonna be more likely to work in kind of like an everyday setting? Or what do you think? So we took all the psychologists that work across the country and pooled them. Would more people be doing like really crazy research, or would more people be just like trying to help people get by? Yeah, just kind of help people get by, exactly. So in the text, they talk about what do most psychologists study? there are quite a few people that work with abnormal behavior, but most of them just work with everyday situations. How do we make kids learn better? How do we make married people get along better? Whatever, common situations. Not the like schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, hallucinations end of the spectrum. It's more of just the how do we improve situations. For those of you over there, we're actually doing 2 review sessions because we had so many people show up. So if you have time after this one's done, it'll be about a half hour. Then people that are in there are going to come out here and everybody else is going to leave. If you want to stand there, that's cool. But if you can't hear that well, just know that we're doing another one in a little bit. Okay? All right. So, okay. Anytime you hear something that talks about the unconscious or the subconscious shaping somebody's behavior, what approach is that most associated with? Psychoanalytical. Sometimes that's also called Freudian theory because Sigmund Freud was the guy that established it. Exactly. Okay. Who are the guys that set up humanistic psychology? What was their name? Yeah, who are the guys that set up humanistic psychology? The main guys associated with humanistic psychology. Okay, one guy was Abraham Maslow. The other guy was Carl Rogers. Again, some of the main tenets or beliefs of humanistic psychology are that the individual has the biggest role in shaping their own reality, their own behavior, their own mental processes, not their subconscious, not conditioning. It's how they interact with their environment, and they're going to choose to act the way that they want to. So Maslow and Rogers were both in that school of thought. One of the big things with humanism also, what do they think about human nature, human will? Is it like... Yeah, it's basically good. So even if somebody does something that's wrong, why are they engaging in that behavior?
They just altered, screwed off.
Right, yeah, something in the culture has kind of twisted their thinking so that they think it's actually good. Okay? There's also questions about the difference between basic science and applied science. Those are a couple different terms that are discussed in the text. Basic and applied science. There's some questions about basic statistics like we talked about today. So let's say I give you a set of 5 numbers. The numbers are 3, 3, 5, 7, and 10, right? What's the mode in that set?
3.
3 because it's the most repeated. Okay, what's the median in that set? 5 because it's the middle. If you were to order them from smallest to largest, the middle one would be the median, and then the mean would be 28 divided by 5, whatever that is, right? So 5.666 or whatever. Okay, so make sure that if you see a set of numbers, you're able to not only calculate what those things would be, but identify what they are. All right, there's a few questions like that. We also talked about different types of studies in class. So I used a couple analogies. We talked about the marshmallow study, the Michelle and Bing study, where they gave the kid the marshmallow and then they wanted to see how long they would take to eat it and if they could wait and not eat it till a later time. They found many years later that the kids that could wait to eat the marshmallows had better lives, right? They were more successful in school, better relationships, all that stuff, okay? If they're studying a group at one point in time and then they check back on them like later, again and again, what's that type of study called? There's basically, in the notes, there's like 2-3 pages where it goes over all the basic designs for research. Longitudinal study, exactly. Okay, a longitudinal study. Now, so let's say that they took you guys as kindergartners and then they measured you as first graders, second graders, third graders, fourth graders, all the way through, it's you're the same sample, right? That's a longitudinal study. If they just studied like juniors and then like 8th graders and 5th graders, and then the next year they studied juniors, 5th graders, 8th graders, whatever, but it's not like they're not tracking that group over time, it's just a new group, that would be like a cross-sectional study because they're getting a sample from a bunch of different people, right? So different ages, but they're not following them across time. Okay? We also talked about surveys and interviews. Those are pretty straightforward. We talked about laboratory observation versus naturalistic observation. So there's strengths and weaknesses with each of those types, right? If I'm doing a laboratory observation, let's say I wanted to see how individuals respond to a specific social situation, I can control a lot more variables in the laboratory than I could like out here, right? Like just in the public setting. But that's kind of staged also because if, again, the analogy I used in most classes was if you were trying to observe like a dating relationship, a couple, and you say, hey, can you interact, sit in this room for a while, we're gonna just observe you. They're not gonna act as naturally as they would in that setting as they would in like the mall or something, right? So that's one of the benefits of laboratory setting is that you can control it. But if you're doing a naturalistic observation, it's a benefit that they're gonna act more naturally. Okay, the other type we talked about was an experiment. In psychological research, can you prove causation? Like, this caused this. Can you prove causation? No, very difficult. Why? Why is it difficult to prove causation? Because what?
You don't know what people are like thinking.
Yeah, you don't know what people are thinking necessarily, so they could deceive you. So you could say, why did you hit them in the face? And they could say, well, I don't like them. When in reality, they don't like them, but there's something else going on that really made them do it. Okay? But it's very difficult to prove causation, so what do we look for instead? What's it called if two variables are related? Correlation. Yep, that means they change at the same time. Okay? So let's say that we have one variable that goes up and the other one goes up. What's that called? Positive. If we have one that goes down and the other one goes down, what's that called? Positive also. If one goes up and the other one goes down or vice versa, that is negative because they go different directions. Okay? What is a measure that tells us how much of a change in variables you see in a sample size? So like one time somebody gets an 88 on a test, the next time it's a 70, the next time it's a 86, it goes up and down. If I'm measuring that, that's what's called a measure of variability, right? One type of statistic that you can use to calculate that is called standard deviation. So I mentioned that again very briefly. Okay, if we have a normal sample and we have statistically what's called a normal curve, they have a graphic for it in the book. Sometimes they'll call that a bell curve, right? So the median at 50, if you have a certain percentage of people, half the people should be below it, half the people should be above it, right? So the middle of that center portion, the center of that on a normal curve, I already kind of talked about it, would be the median, right? The very middle of it would be the median. It's not necessarily the mode, but it would be the median. Okay, one of the other things we talked about with an experiment was the independent variable, dependent variable, control group, and experimental group. So let's say I wanted to see how coming to the review session influenced people's grades on the test. And theoretically I could control everything else. The only difference was whether students came to the review session or not, right? So the coming to the review session, right? The act of coming to the review session, what would that be? That would be the independent variable. And then if I'm trying to see how well people are doing on the test, what would the dependent variable be? Test performance, okay? So the experimental group is the people that come to the review session. The control group is who? People that would just study like normal, exactly. So be able to identify those and also be able to apply those concepts. Those concepts, I should say. Okay. What are mean, median, and mode called collectively? They're called measures of what? Measures of, it's two words. First word starts with a C. Second word starts with a T. They're called measures of central tendency. Which one of those is the best? It depends on the sample, right? It really depends on the sample which one's the best. Which one's used the most often? The mean, yep. So when you hear somebody say, what was the average? It's implied that they mean the mean, right? Okay, if you're in an experiment and neither the experimenter nor the subjects know who is getting exposed to the independent variable, what type of experiment is that called? A double-blind study, exactly. What type of study is it where you study a group over time again? Longitudinal study. What's it called if the subjects don't know what they're getting exposed to, but the researchers do? Single-blind study. Good. Okay, prior to the section where we talked about contemporary approaches, we talked about past approaches in psychology, some of those that were really common. One of those approaches had a belief that all behavior, all mental processes are designed for one purpose or serve one purpose, and that's to increase the likelihood that an organism is going to survive. What's that called? What was that approach called? Starts with an F. Yeah, the functionalist approach, exactly. Okay, so we talked about some of the other early approaches, right? Another one of the early approaches was named using a German word that means whole pattern, where they tried to look how people's perceptions of collective things influence their behavior. What was that approach called? For whole pattern. Somebody said it. Gestalt, yep. So the early approach where they studied the whole pattern, like the collective results of somebody's actions, that's called Gestalt psychology. If you're looking at somebody's biological or physical state, there's another word for that, kind of a more technical word for that. What's that called? If I'm trying to study somebody's like heart rate, respiration, I'm studying their what state? Physiological state. Good. Okay, if we're looking at somebody's mental state, what's the term for what goes on in somebody's mind called? The technical term for that? Cognitive, yep, cognitive state. Okay, let's say that I give, I have like a whole bunch of these energy drinks and I say, drink these before you take the test, and they're gonna make you guys do better on the test. But it's really just water with like Crystal Light or something, and then you guys all do better on the test. What's that called? Placebo. The placebo effect, exactly. So what that is the belief in or the belief of the subjects in the variable that they might be exposed to, potentially could be or could not be exposed to, that causes the change, not the actual exposure to a specific variable. In the text, this was one of the days I was gone, but they talked about psychologists that work like in certain areas of employment. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. What do we got going on here?
A little review session for advanced psychology.
Oh.
Yeah. So
You let this kid in here?
I did. Yeah. You want to say hi to the camera? This is gonna be on YouTube later.
YouTube? I
For the
don't
people
wanna say
that
hi.
you don't want to say hi.
No.
Yeah. For the people that can't make it.
I don't
So
know any of these faces.
Yeah.
It's probably not a bad thing.
it's kind of scary how like after a little while you start getting old, right?
I'm teaching now.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Where at?
At Centennial.
Okay.
I'm just student teaching, but
Oh okay. Cool.
yeah. Okay, have
Well-
a good review.
Yeah. You too. It was good to see you, Greg. Oh. Do you know who that is?
No, but I didn't know if I should pause it or
Oh, that's fine. It's Chelsea Jenskow's brother. Use this one. Okay, next one. Well, actually, let me go on to what I was talking about. When there was like one slide, you probably did it on Friday. It talked about different careers in psychology. Okay, so if you're trying to study how people think and how they behave and act in a group, like in a business, to try to improve the performance of that business, what would your title be? You're working in what branch of psychology? Yeah, organizational psychology. So people do that, like they bring in consultants that'll walk around, interview people at work, study the methods and procedure, and make suggestions about how to improve the business by improving the interactions that all the people have. So imagine like if you've seen the movie Office Space, if you haven't, it's hilarious, right? But there's like this boss that comes up, he always carries a coffee cup and he's like, yeah, I need you to do that. And he just never really listens to people. They bring in some people on the outside and they all interview people. Their names are the Bobs in the show. They're trying to figure out who's doing a good job, how to improve the business. They function like organizational psychologists, right? Okay. What are some other examples of types of psychologists from that section of notes? Like what they could get involved in? Like let's say you're studying the legal system, trying to figure out how like some criminal's thinking. What type of psychologist would you be? You're studying evidence from a crime, you're studying like patterns of, in the past we had a serial killer that was like this, they're trying to profile them. What branch is that? Nope. Starts with a F. F. Forensic psychologist. Yep. Okay, so again, we talked about the different branches, the modern approaches. Those modern approaches, again, are the biological, sociocultural, experimental, psychoanalytical, cognitive, and behavioral. And like I said, there's an identification section on the test where you'll see a statement and you have to match it to the branch that fits the best, okay? So if it's one that's focused on perception, memories, all that stuff, what is that an example of? Which branch does that fit the most? Like your conscious, emotions, perceptions, what you're thinking of. Which one does that fit the best? Cognitive, yep. If you're conscious, it's cognitive. For your subconscious, what would that be? Psychoanalytical. If you're studying how conditioning, how responses to the environment shape your behavior and your thinking, what would that be? Behavioral approach, good. If you're studying how people's culture, like the culture they're brought up in, shapes their thinking and behavior, that's sociocultural. If you're studying how changes in like brain chemistry or brain functioning, like the chemicals, the makeup of the brain influences behavior, that's what? Biological. Okay. And then which one am I missing? I think that's it. Humanistic, that's right. So humanistic is focused on what?
Like how people like think and like their own
what they want,
Right.
personal, what they want for themselves.
Yep. So how individuals' self-directed choices shape their behavior. Good. Okay, so which one would be most focused on how social status, gender, and ethnicity influence your thinking pattern and behavior? Sociocultural, exactly. Okay. How about which one's going to look mostly at, or the most closely at dreams and analyzing dreams? Psychoanalytical, good. Which one's going to look at how, like, certain, like if you're working, how if you get a raise, how that would influence how hard you work or what you think about your job? Behavioral, yep, because you're responding to some stimulus. Okay. Let's see. Who is the main guy that's tied to the cognitive approach? He came up with 4 stages of cognitive development. Kind of worked with kids a lot. Piaget. Piaget. Good. All right. So that's it in a nutshell. Again, I didn't go over every single thing that's on the test. I didn't like read the test questions to you, but I tried to ask questions that'd be related to the test questions that would help you to study. Do study that review sheet. That'll help you out. Again, you got 3 essay questions. You got to do 2 of them. And then there's 40 questions that are either identification, like that. You'll identify the key approaches, which one matches. There's a big section of matching with like 12 in it. And then there's 20 multiple choice. Okay?
You pick 2 or there will be 2?
There'll be 3, you pick 2.
So you didn't give us essay questions to do?
They're on the review sheet.
Okay.
That's on SharePoint.
I have
Yep.
that.
So it's the bottom right. Okay? All right, good? All right, thanks guys.
Thanks.
Next time we'll have to go somewhere else because